Chapter 071 Shadows of the Past. After the attack on the Evason base had been concluded and it became obvious that no immediate invasion would result from it, Zorian proceeded to re-establish his link to Koth. Since he had dismissed his simulacrum in Koth before the attack, he had to rely on Damon's help for the second time in the restart. Although it kind of bothered him that he was forced to rely on Damon so much, he had to admit his help made things a lot easier than they would have otherwise been. He didn't expect any problems to crop up and, in a way, there really hadn't been any. The dimensional gate opened just fine, after all. The problem was that it opened directly inside the Tartamatula estate. Instead of finding some out-of-the-way location in the jungle, like they had agreed on beforehand, Damon had decided to simply open the gate inside a heavily warded room meant for receiving teleporting visitors. While a dozen or so Tartamatula family members stood around the edges of the room and watched. Zorian, who had stepped through the gate first, was so shocked at the sight that he immediately halted in his tracks. This caused Zack, who was coming right behind him, to crash into him. Thankfully, they managed to keep their balance instead of falling to the floor in a tangle of limbs. That would have been awkward. "Hey, why did you stall?" "That's a lot bigger reception than I was expecting," Zack said, looking around. Zorian didn't bother responding to Zack's feeble attempt at humor. Instead, he zeroed in on his older brother and gave him an outraged glare. "Damon, what the hell were you thinking?" To his credit, Damon actually winced at the question, looking properly guilty. "I'm sorry," he said, waving his hands in front of him in a placating gesture. "I didn't have a choice, okay? I can't leave the Tartamatula estate anymore and I couldn't just open a dimensional gate in their home without their knowledge or consent. It was either this or aborting the whole thing entirely." Zack and Zorian were quiet for a second, processing that statement. "Why can't you leave the Tartamatula estate?" Zack finally asked. "Are you a prisoner or something?" "It's complicated," Damon said with a heavy sigh. "Let's go find somewhere quiet to talk." Before either Zack or Zorian could say anything, one of the gathered Tartamatula decided to cut in and make a suggestion. It was Alana, the woman who had greeted them the first time they had visited the estate. "I know just the place," Alana said. "For a family of our stature, not having an appropriate meeting room for occasions such as these would be quite an embarrassment. Please wait a minute while I make some arrangements and then we can go." Zorian gave Alana a thoughtful look. Though her words made it seem she was just trying to be a good host, he could understand the underlying message easily enough. The Tartamatula were an involved party in all this, and they wanted to be present during the talk. Alana raised an eyebrow at his look, as if daring him to object. He didn't. "That's quite all right," he simply said. "Me and Zack will go collapse the gate while you deal with things on your end." Zorian had no idea what Damon had told the Tartamatula about the gate. Hopefully he hadn't been foolish enough to reveal that he and Zorian were opening passages between two different continents, in which case it was imperative that they close the gate quickly, before they could puzzle out the truth for themselves. As he and Zack worked to collapse the gate, he could hear Alana conversing with some of the other Tartamatula in the room. His grasp on the local language was still very poor, so the only thing he understood was that she ordered food and drink to be made and brought to them. Zorian was in no mood for either, but he figured out it would be impolite to try and stop her. A little while later, they were all ushered into a relatively small but luxurious room. There were 5 of them present: Alana, Damon, Arissa, Zack and Zorian. Despite the presence of Alana and Arissa, though, it was Damon that provided most of the explanation for what was happening. Apparently, one or more members of Damon's team had talked to outsiders about the orb they had found, and the story had blown up very quickly. Within hours, everyone and their mother wanted to speak to Damon to find out what he intended to do with the orb and to try and influence him to sell it to whatever group they represented. Caught off guard by the sudden flood of interested buyers and aware that not everyone was willing to take their refusal to sell the orb in good grace, Damon and his team retreated to the Tartamatula estate and barricaded themselves there until further notice. "The people after us can't afford to be too brazen with the Tartamatula, so we're safe while we remain inside the estate," Damon concluded. But the moment we step out we'll be ambushed by dozens of different groups. They know we're in here. They have the estate heavily monitored. Everyone and everything going in or out of the estate is closely tracked. I couldn't possibly leave the estate to open the gate elsewhere. Maybe I'm just stupid, but why don't the Tarantula simply tell all these people to back off? They are supposed to be the main political force here, no? Zack asked. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Alana said. There are too many powerful groups making their moves here, quite a few of them from outside our sphere of influence. Though they cannot afford to take us lightly, the same is true for us as well. This is a sensitive situation and we have to move carefully. Rest assured, though, that we are taking note of every slight against us for when the time is right. Another issue is that some elements of the local government are discussing the possibility of simply confiscating the orb from us by force, Damon said. The Tarantula have to spend a lot of their influence on making sure that the initiative doesn't get anywhere. Damn it, I knew it was important to keep this find a secret, but I had no idea it would inspire this sort of greed. It's a portable pocket dimension of massive size, Arissa pointed out. On top of that, it contains ruins from the Age of Gods, and probably the remains of Aventemti's wealth. There could be divine artifacts in there, plants and animals that have gone extinct in the rest of the world, anything. Of course it inspires so much greed. You're fortunate to have the Tarantula family to shield you from all this while we figure out what to do. Yes, I get it, Damon said patiently. I'm lucky to have you, dear. Have you made any trips to the pocket dimension yet? Zack asked curiously. We haven't even discovered how to deploy the orb, Damon said, shaking his head. We don't have a command marker like Zorian does, so we have to do things the hard way. Meaning? Zack prodded for details. We have to reverse engineer the control spells that are used for operating the orb, Damon said. A generational treasure like this one would definitely have a method of controlling the orb without a command marker, as a safety measure if nothing else. We just have to find it. Unfortunately, that could take a while. Damon gave Zorian a meaningful look. Though Zorian didn't know for sure what he was trying to tell him, he could guess. While finding a way to operate the orb without a marker was not a priority for him and Zack, it would mean a lot for Damon. He was probably well aware that Zorian had no intention whatsoever of revealing his abilities to Damon outside the time loop, which would make those control spells absolutely crucial to his mission. Without them, even removing the orb from its resting place would be impossible, greatly complicating everything. Even if we had the means of operating the orb, we would still refrain from sending an expedition to its interior at this time, Arissa noted. The possibility of further guardian beasts, like that God-touched Hydra, is too high. Months of preparation would be required to mount a proper expedition, and the current political situation makes such preparations impossible. Yes, exactly, Damon quickly agreed. He turned to Zack and Zorian. And because I'm stuck here all the time, I can't really hire the experts I need to figure out how to operate the orb, either. The truth is that I have very little to do here. I was thinking it might be a good idea for me to disappear for a few days. Get the orb away from covetous eyes and talk to some old friends about my options. This again, Arissa said with an unhappy frown. This sparked a brief argument between Arissa and Damon, since Damon didn't want to explain what exactly he was up to and Arissa insisted that she had every right to know the details. In all honesty, Zorian thought Arissa's position was quite reasonable and empathized with her frustration at Damon's evasiveness. However, he also couldn't fault Damon for this, since it wasn't like he could just openly say that. If you want us to take you back to Seoria with us when we reopen the gate, you should just say so, Zack said. Everyone sent him a shocked look. Well, everyone except Zorian. He just buried his face in his hands and tried to take deep breaths. Damn it, Zack. He mumbled into his hands. What? Zack protested, giving Zorian an exasperated look. Any story you and Damon cook up wouldn't last a day and you know it. They are not stupid. They'd figure it out soon enough. Thank you, Mr. Nevada, Alana told him. I'm glad that at least one man here respects our reasoning skills. Zack gave her a thumbs up and a sunny grin. "You're saying you opened a dimensional passage here all the way from Eldamar?" Arissa asked, sounding just a little bit incredulous. "We do a lot of crazy stuff," Zack said with a careless shrug. It turned out that neither Alana nor Arissa were very familiar with the details of how the gate spell works. This wasn't very surprising, as the spell was extremely rare, but somehow Zorian kept forgetting little details like that. After Zorian gave them a brief explanation of how the gate spell functioned, Arissa gave him a strange look. "What?" Zorian asked, feeling somewhat self-conscious. "This method you use to ignore distance limitations requires another person helping you on the other side, yes?" she asked. Zorian nodded wordlessly. "Then how can you open a gate back to Eldamar? Can the third Kaczynski brother cast the gate spell, too?" "What, for Toph? Please," Zorian scoffed. "He'll be lucky not to flunk out of the academy." "Zorian," Damon protested. He never liked it when Zorian bad-mouthed the rest of the family. "No, we'll be using the simulacrum I left back in Seoria," Zorian said, completely ignoring Damon's outburst. "Since I can cast the gate spell, my simulacrum can obviously do the same." "Oh, so you can create a simulacrum too?" Alana asked casually, not sounding particularly surprised. Zorian had to hand it to her, she was very good at projecting an aura of serene confidence. Arissa seemed to be trying to mimic that attitude, but she was nowhere near good enough to pull it off. One could see that these kind of reveals bothered her and put her somewhat off balance. "We do a lot of crazy stuff," Zorian said. He thought about mimicking Zack completely and giving her a thumbs up and a cheeky smile, but quickly dropped the idea. That sort of thing was something only Zack could pull off without looking like a total idiot. In the end, they managed to hammer out an agreement. Damon would return to Seoria with Zack and Zorian and would take the orb of the first emperor along with him. Zorian would leave a simulacrum in the Tartamatula estate so that they could return via gate spell in exactly 4 days. Zorian thought this would be the end of it, but his hopes were ruthlessly squashed when Damon told him he still had to explain to his team that he would be away for a while. For a moment, Zorian felt the urge to make an overdramatic gesture to the uncaring heavens. And here he'd thought this would just be a short visit to Koth, consisting of little more than replacing his lost simulacrum and asking Damon if he had found out anything new about the orb. Sometimes he just couldn't win. Break. It was a massive relief to Zorian when the three of them finally stepped through the gate and returned to Seoria. Both the Tartamatula and Damon's team were on edge right now, and thus rather exasperating to deal with. He kind of felt bad for his simulacrum, who would be stuck with them for the next several days. Oh well, at least he had Kerma and Taran to talk to. Those two were fairly interesting and he suspected he might be able to broker some kind of trade with at least one of them. Regardless, he was back and could devote himself to other matters. Xvim's efforts to convince various experts to trade their secrets with him had been reasonably successful. Sadamir had to be properly interrogated. The efforts of the researchers to understand the Ebeson Gate stabilization frame were starting to bear fruit, and the silent doorway adepts were hinting that they were willing to send a group over to Koth to acquire a gate key. Sadly, recent events concerning Damon and the orb had probably made that last idea a dead end in this restart. His simulacrum couldn't possibly leave the Tartamatula estate without 100 pairs of eyes following his every move. Unfortunate. He could really use an alternate entrance to Koth that didn't rely on Damon right now. He would have to assign a high priority to this idea in future restarts. Damon had agreed to hand over the orb to him and Zack while he was in Seoria. Partially because he figured they could find out far more about it than he could, due to possessing a marker that could actually operate it, and partially because he wasn't entirely sure the orb would be safe in his possession. News travel faster than people. By all rights, his little trip to Seoria should have gone undetected by his pursuers, but he couldn't be completely sure. Thus, he felt it was for the best if he didn't have the orb on him unless absolutely necessary. Zorian expected that he would be the only one that could tinker with the orb to discover its secrets, since Zack didn't have the necessary personal soul awareness to control his marker. He was very much wrong. Apparently, Zack didn't need to have conscious control over his marker to take command of the orb. After an hour or so of tinkering with the orb, Zack managed to connect to it instinctively. And after that one success, he no longer needed an hour of tinkering to connect to again. Simply touching the orb would be enough to re-establish contact. Zack didn't even have to concentrate on it to pull it off. A touch and a stray thought were enough. Zorian was a little sour about that. The orb certainly never reacted that way to him, no matter how many hours he spent interacting with it. No, he had to spend months going through that hellish soul awareness training and then more time painstakingly studying the way the marker worked to get as far as he did. This sort of stuff really made it obvious that his marker was some kind of inferior version of the one on Zack. It had been only a day since they were back in Seoria when Damon surprised him again. He wanted to talk to Kirill and Fertov. This was a bit of a problem. Both of their siblings knew for a fact that Damon shouldn't be in Seoria. Mother and father had gone to Kuth to meet with him. How on earth did he intend to explain his presence here? But Damon insisted that he needed to do this, and Zorian didn't feel like arguing with him. There was probably no great harm in it, and he was pretty sure that Damon would go and have those conversations behind his back if he was too stubborn. Amusingly, Damon wanted to talk to Kirill and Fertov alone, without anyone else being present. Zorian was almost certain that meant he wanted to ask them specifically about Zorian. Fertov didn't know anything about Zorian, and Kirill was a little tattletale and would no doubt tell Zorian everything that she and Damon talked about. But he told Damon none of that and simply wished him luck before sending him on his way. The next day, Damon came back to talk to him, looking lost and confused. "They didn't even want to talk to me," he complained, sounding quite dejected. It actually made Zorian feel bad for him somewhat. "Come on, it's not that bad," Zorian comforted him. "I don't know about Fertov, but I'm pretty sure Kirill wouldn't have snubbed you like that. Imaya tells me you spent an entire hour with her." "Yeah, but that's all I did with her," Damon complained. "She spent the entire hour fidgeting and looking uncomfortable. She barely spoke, and only when I specifically prodded her. I'm not entirely sure, but I think she was actually a little scared of me." "That's..." Damien waved his hands in the air, as if trying to convey some kind of unpronounceable concept through silent gesticulation. "Sad?" Zorian offered. "Sure, let's go with that," Damon said. "Also worrying. And upsetting. And a whole host of other things. Especially when coupled with what happened with Fertov. Do you know what happened when I knocked on his door?" "Not really, no," Zorian told him. He had actually known about Damon's talk with Kirill, since she had told him all about it when he had come to Imaya's place in the evening, but he honestly had no idea how Damon's talk with Fertov had gone. Not well, obviously, but it would be interesting to hear why. "What did he do?" "He was just really abrasive to me right from the start," Damon said. "He refused to even let me in, eventually started shouting at me and then slammed the door in my face and ignored me." "Huh. Interesting." Damon looked at Zorian, silently asking him for an explanation. Zorian said nothing, though, and Damon grew visibly frustrated as seconds ticked by. He ran both of his hands through his hair and clutched it tightly in his fists, as if wanting to tear it off. "You're going to go prematurely bald if you keep doing that," Zorian commented lightly. Damon gave him an unamused glare. But he did remove his hands from his head. "I don't understand." Damon protested loudly. Am I such a horrible older brother? I knew you didn't like me, but even Fertov. Even little Kirill? Why? What did I do?" Zorian clacked his tongue and considered things for a second. On one hand, he felt that Damon was getting exactly what he deserved. On the other hand, the fact that Damon was so upset over this meant that his mental image of him was a little unfair. He decided to be a little nice to his older brother for a change. In regards to Kirill, the answer is simple, "My dear eldest brother," Zorian told him. "You're practically a stranger to her. By the time she was old enough to interact with people, you were almost never at home. When was the last time you talked with her? Disregarding yesterday's meeting, of course." Damon fumbled. You can't even remember, Zorian stated, shaking his head. Anyway, all she had of you were stories she heard of you. Most of which came either from Mother or from me. After all, I'm one of the people who interacted with her the most over the years. Oh, heavens help me, Damon lamented. What exactly did you tell her about me? The truth, Zorian shrugged. You mean your truth, Damon accused. Of course, Zorian responded, completely unmoved by the accusation. But don't worry, I kept quiet about your worst excesses. Truth be told, I never liked talking about you to anyone, and that included Kirill. And besides, Mother never failed to take your side in everything. If it were just a matter of stories, Kirill would be more ambivalent to you. The thing is, she needs help. And she knows she'll never get it from you. She just might get it from me, though, which is why she doesn't want to sabotage her relations with me by getting cozy with you. She knows you kind of piss me off. What do you mean she needs help? Damon frowned. And why are you so sure she'd never get it from me? Because it would require standing up to Mother, Zorian said. Over the next hour or so, Zorian tried to familiarize Damon with Kirill's situation. The arranged marriage their parents had prepared for her. Her desire to learn magic like the rest of them. He tried to keep the explanations brief, worried that telling this to Damon constituted some kind of betrayal towards Kirill, who had told him these things in confidence. He said enough for Damon to form a rudimentary picture of what was happening with Kirill behind the scenes, though. I can't believe I never heard of this, Damon said, his eyes somewhat unfocused as he seemed to recall something in his head. I speak to Mother and Father often and they never mentioned this. Did you ever actually ask them about Kirill? Zorian asked. Damon was quiet for a few moments. No, he eventually admitted. Well, there you go, Zorian shrugged. Damon exhaled heavily and then corrected his posture, sitting a little straighter in his chair. Okay, I admit I haven't been very fair to our little sister. I guess I kind of deserved such a chilly reception from her, Damon said. What about for Toph, then? What's his deal? How would I know? Zorian protested. Do you honestly think I speak to Toph about you? Damon gave him an annoyed huff. Yes, I get it, you never talk about me to anyone if you can help it. But surely you have some inkling about how Toph thinks and what bothers him. You've been interacting with him for 6 years now. Zorian made a weird face, momentarily struck speechless by this statement. What? Zorian laughed. Whatever gave you that idea? Why would I be interacting with Toph? Are you serious? Damon asked incredulously. Zorian stared at him. He's your brother. You live in the same city. You can visit him anytime you want. So? Zorian asked, inclining his head uncomprehendingly. Are you honestly telling me that in all these years, you haven't seriously talked to our brother even once? Damon asked. His tone was pleading, as if begging Zorian to tell him he's wrong. That's what I'm saying, yes, Zorian nodded. Why would Damon expect anything else from him? Doesn't the restart end in a massive invasion? Damon frowned. Zorian nodded again. What does Toph do during the invasion? Presumably he reaches the academy shelters and spends the night there, along with the other students, Zorian shrugged. Admittedly, the shelters hadn't been very safe during the one occasion he had actually experienced them, but that was when Red Robe had actively been helping the invaders by feeding them information. Without his help, the shelters were actually pretty safe. Presumably? You never checked? Damon asked. Zorian shook his head in denial. Zorian, for heaven's sake. I don't see why you're so surprised by this, Zorian told him honestly. Toph is my second least favorite person in the whole family, right after Father. Of course I never bothered to check up on him. Damon opened his mouth, as if he wanted to continue that argument, but then just shook his head and gave up. Never mind, Damon sighed. Did you have any interactions with him during all this time? Actually, yes, Zorian said. He pushes this one girl into a purple creeper patch near the end of every restart and then comes to me to beg for a healing salve. I used to just avoid being home whenever he comes, but these days it's not even necessary. He never comes to find me if I stay at Imaya's place. He pushes this girl into a purple creeper patch regardless of what you change in a restart? Damon said, frowning. As far as I can tell, yes, Zorian confirmed. The girl has a huge crush on him, if that means anything to you. Damon made a thoughtful hum. It's better than nothing, I guess. But really, Zorian, must you be so petty and callous? I know you and Furtov didn't get along as kids, but this sort of attitude is a little too much. You nurse your grudges way too deeply. It's easy for you to call for peace and understanding, Zorian said, folding his arms over his chest defiantly. It's not you who had to deal with Furtov's crappy attitude over the years. All I'm saying is that maybe you should give him a chance, Damon said. Like you did with Kirill when you decided to take her with you to Seoria. If you were wrong about her, who's to say you weren't wrong about Furtov as well? But I wasn't really wrong about her, Zorian pointed out. I didn't want her around because I felt she was a selfish little blabbermouth that would distract me from my studies and tattle on me when she returns to Mother. That's all still true, it's just that I no longer care about that. Provided I actually manage to find a way out of this time loop, my future is set. I can afford a distraction or two, and Kirill running off and revealing my plans and activities to Mother is irrelevant because our parents can't stop me anymore. I'm so skilled and powerful that I can do whatever I want, Mother and Father be damned. Somewhat surprisingly, Damon didn't grow even more frustrated at this response, like Zorian thought he would. Instead he just gave him a sad smile and shook his head ruefully. Mother and Father are so concerned about me making a mistake that they are rushing over to Kuth even as we speak to talk me out of my marriage to Arisa, but they fail to notice a crisis developing right in front of them, he said. We really are one messed up family, aren't we? And the terrifying thing in all this is that I will forget all about this very soon, won't I? After the summer festival, it will be as if none of this ever happened. That's so unfair. How the hell can I fix a problem if I have no memory of its existence? I don't think you could fix our family, even if you had all the time in the world, Zorian told him. But yes, the reality of the time loop is rather soul-crushing if one really thinks about it. You're dealing with this pretty well, all things considered. It's mostly because I have avoided thinking about it too deeply, I think, Damon said. Now that we're getting closer to the time limit, I find my thoughts wandering towards it more and more. Especially since I've done so much in these last few weeks. I've realized so many things. Important things. It's frightening and infuriating to realize I must lose it all. Well, I'm sure you've heard about the notebooks I'm transferring between restarts for various people, Zorian noted. If it's really so important, you can just write it down and hand it to me for safekeeping. Oh. Damon smiled. So I actually qualify for that prestigious service? I must say, the way you've been talking about our family, I was starting to get a little worried. What if you intended to just forget about me in all future restarts? You already know how to find the orb, after all, and I know you aren't exactly a big fan of me. Zorian gave him a mildly uncomfortable look. He had been thinking of something like that. Though his eldest brother would surely be useful in tracking down and recovering the rest of the pieces of the key, it bothered Zorian a great deal to rely on Damon for anything. It just felt wrong. Convincing Damon to help them was a time-consuming task, too, so was it really worth the time to include him in their efforts? In the end he realized he was just looking for excuses. They needed the help that Damon could provide. If nothing else, it wasn't very fair to Zack to sabotage their chances of getting out of the time loop just because he had a problem with Damon. Plus, the truth was, I was wrong about you, okay? Zorian said with a heavy sigh. I still think you're very annoying, but you're not as bad as the Damon that lived inside my head. It hurt him to say it, but it was the truth. Maybe Damon had changed after he had moved out of the house and stopped interacting with Zorian, or maybe Zorian's image of him had never been all that reliable to begin with. Whatever the truth, This Daemon was more helpful and reasonable than the dark giant that had loomed over him in the past. I'm not sure if I'd call it wrong, exactly. Regardless of their reasons, the other two siblings don't like me much either. I'm clearly an abject failure as an older brother. It's a sobering realization, Daemon mused. After a second of silence, he shook his head as if to clear it up. But enough of depressing topics like that. You mentioned the notebooks you're carrying across restarts for Xvim and the others. As it happens, I've taken the time to talk with Xvim yesterday. He told me about the trade deals you two are trying to set up with various experts. Yes, it's honestly one of my better ideas, Zorian nodded. It's already showing results and there's every indication we can do even better in future restarts. I don't think every single one of those experts will agree to a trade in the end, but quite a few are clearly open to the idea if approached by someone they actually respect. Are you thinking of helping Xvim convince people? No, Daemon shook his head. I'll be pleased to help if Xvim asks for it, but my involvement could easily turn the initiative into an unmitigated disaster. You probably think of my fame as purely beneficial, but the truth is it causes many mages to view me as a threat. A lot of them would never trade anything with me. Why do you think I never learned how to cast the gate spell before you came along? I see, Zorian said thoughtfully. If not that, though, why did you mention Xvim's efforts? Well, began Daemon. Gathering secret knowledge from Altasia's many experts is a commendable initiative, but it is hard work and it will likely only provide incremental improvement to your capabilities. True, Zorian said. But what's the alternative? All the low-hanging fruit has already been plucked. Not necessarily, Daemon said with a grin. What is and is not low-hanging fruit depends on a person's abilities, and you have something that few other people do, an ability to traverse between continents with ease. Zorian thought about it for a second and then motioned for Daemon to continue. He didn't quite see what he was getting at. What I'm saying is that Koth would be a good place to extend your magic-gathering initiative, Daemon continued. Unlike Slodic, which is relatively well connected to Altasia due to the existence of the teleport network, Koth is quite remote. Despite that, they use the same basic magic system that we do, unlike Sin. This makes them a great place to find unexpected spell combinations and novel alchemy. Who knows what kind of low-hanging fruit can be obtained by combining our magical traditions with those of Koth. Zorian raised his eyebrow at his eldest brother. Daemon looked quite animated as he spoke of the idea. And I suppose you're volunteering to run this sort of initiative? Zorian asked. Ha ha. Daemon laughed nervously. To be perfectly honest, doing this was one of my objectives in coming to Koth. I was in the process of laying the groundwork for it even before the time loop started. Well, that's great then, Zorian told him honestly. I don't see an issue with the idea, then. Great, Daemon said, giving him a sunny smile reminiscent of Zack. It's just that this time loop came too soon and not all of the preparations were complete. I may need a tiny loan from my dearest brother to start things up. Break. A few days later, Daemon was returned to Koth. The orb was left in Seoria, since Daemon figured it was safer that way and because Zack had really taken a liking to it. Busy as he was with other things, Zorian decided to delegate all orb-related tinkering to Zack. Considering how much more strongly the orb reacted to him, Zack may be in a better position to uncover its secrets anyway. Today, though, Zorian had received a somewhat unusual request. Taven wanted to talk to him. In private. Normally such a request wouldn't be particularly notable, but Zorian had actually not seen or heard from Taven at all since their attack on the Ebeson base. If it were not for Lanix's assurances that she had survived the battle in perfect health, Zorian would have been honestly worried for her. As it was obvious she had been avoiding him for some reason. He had actually thought about tracking her down to ask what was happening, but the end of the restart was approaching and so many things were vying for his time and attention. No matter. Since she had reached out to him all of a sudden, he would presumably find out what was bothering her quite soon. When they met he offered to teleport them to some empty, quiet place, but she would have none of that. Apparently when she said she wanted to talk in private, she meant she would bring him to her family training hall, the same one where they sometimes spart against one another in previous restarts. She seemed to find the place calming and reassuring. "So what's this about?" he asked her. "I'm worried," she said. She sounded worried, too. Zorian waited for a few seconds for a clarification of what exactly she was worried about, but Taven seemed to have trouble finding the words. She paced around the training hall like a caged tiger, scowling and shaking her head. "No, seriously, what is this about?" Zorian asked. She still didn't say anything. "Is it time loop related?" he added after a bit of thought. "Of course it's time loop related." She burst out at him. She looked like she was going to snap at him but quickly managed to rein herself in. She shook her head sadly. "And, in a way, it isn't. I don't even know why I called you here. It's stupid. I should just, don't even dare try to send me away now," Zorian warned her. I won't, she assured him. I just realized I probably lost you as a friend." Zorian gave her an incredulous look. "And why would you think that?" Zorian asked her curiously. "Because this time loop has changed you," she told him. "You already feel like a stranger to me. You're so hard to read these days, and so very capable. Everything I can do, you can do better. And it's only going to get worse as you spend time in here. By the time you get out, why would you need me anymore? By the time this is all resolved, I will probably no longer have a friend." You're being overdramatic," Zorian told her. He knew he was probably sounding a little dismissive, but he honestly didn't know what else to tell her. "I know you don't remember this, but I spend a lot of time interacting with you in various restarts. There is zero chance that I'm just going to forget you." "Well, yes, I'm sure that you won't just forget me," she huffed. "But any concern you have for me will be of the, well, patronizing kind. You'll be so above me it isn't even funny. We won't be equals, you know. It'll be you, a secret archmage, keeping an eye on his old friend for old time's sake. It's very depressing." "Ah," said Zorian slowly. There was a lot of truth in what she was saying. There was really no way their friendship would be the same as it had been before the time loop. However, that was not necessarily a bad thing. His past self was somewhat bitter with Taven. He had not considered them to be close friends, something that Taven seemed rather oblivious to. Much like she was oblivious to his past crush on her, really. So yes, their relationship would never be the same. But was that a bad thing? While Taven might lament the loss of their earlier friendship, Zorian couldn't help but wonder whether there would have even been a friendship if he hadn't got stuck in this time loop. Would he have eventually overcome the hurt of having his love confession laughed at and re-established close bonds with her? Probably. But it would have taken quite some time, and he wasn't sure Taven would have stuck around him for long enough to see that happen. "Why did you ever decide to become friends with me, anyway?" Zorian asked her curiously. "This will sound a little self-deprecating, but I don't think I was that good of a friend." "Ha ha." She laughed, her mood brightening a little. "Well, it's good that you're so honest. That's the one change I like about the new you." She picked up a practice doll from a nearby bench and started making minute corrections to it. Zorian couldn't see what they were meant to do, so he assumed she was just stalling for time and giving herself something to do. "Since you were willing to be a little self-deprecating, I will follow your example," Taven eventually said. "I wasn't a very good friend either to you or to anyone else. I'm too blunt and impulsive and I can't judge the situation and people very well. Most people actually find me pretty insulting and aggravating." Zorian was going to say something to cheer her up, but then he remembered that her nickname for him was Roach. He still remembered the argument he'd had with her when she had tried to convince him that being compared to cockroaches was a compliment because they were amazing animals, famed for their adaptability and resilience. Eventually he caved in and reluctantly let her call him that, but he could see why some people would be deathly insulted if she were to pull that kind of stunt on them. "I actually have very few friends aside from you," she continued. "Aside from you, only my two teammates seem to like me. But Yurik and Oran. They're old friends. I'll never be anything other than the third wheel if I hang out around them. But I didn't have any other friends, Zorian surmised. Yeah, Taven told him. You annoyed me, I annoyed you, but we got along with each other anyway. Maybe you weren't a good friend, but I wasn't much better, so it didn't matter. But now you're getting better, and I can't. She hugged the practice doll like a little girl trying to comfort herself with a favorite toy. It was a somewhat weird sight, since the practice doll was the size of an adult human and creepily featureless. Zorian stared at her, wondering how to handle this. He didn't see how he could convince Taven that the nature of their friendship wouldn't change once he got out of the time loop. It would be an obvious lie. Of course, Zorian did not consider this change to be a bad thing, but to explain why he felt that way he would have to. Why not? If he was really honest with himself, he always had wanted to do this. He just hadn't had the courage to go through with it. I had a crush on you once, he told her. She exclaimed, jerking in surprise and dropping the practice doll. It clattered to the floor, leaving deafening silence in its wake. For a moment, anyway. What do you mean, you had a crush on me? When? How? Do you remember that time I asked you out on a date? He asked her. What? Are we talking about that time? She fumbled. Zorian nodded anyway. He had only ever asked her to a date once in the time they knew each other, so she couldn't be thinking of anything else. But, isn't that when I laughed at you? Zorian gave her a long-suffering look. Yes, he confirmed. Yes, it is. It wasn't a joke, Taven. I was dead serious about it. Ha ha ha. She laughed nervously. Wow, that's really something. She buried her face into her hands for a moment. Gods above, I'm so stupid sometimes, she mumbled into her hands. Then she punched him in the shoulder. Hey! He protested in mild outrage. He'd normally be more bothered about the sudden physical violence, but it was Taven. He expected that sort of thing from her. What the hell? And you're stupid too. She told him. Why the hell would you just accept me laughing at you like that if you were being serious? Well, what the hell was I supposed to do? Zorian protested. Tell me I was wrong. Ask me out again. Get angry before storming off. Taven shouted. Anything. Not just pretend everything was fine and retreat with the tail between your legs like a wounded puppy. I mean, I kept joking about that long afterwards and you still didn't say anything. At least if I knew I wouldn't have been rubbing salt into your wounds like that. It doesn't matter, Zorian grunted. In the end I still got an answer to my question. You clearly weren't interested in me that way. You found the very idea laughable, even. Oh come on. She whined. That's not fair. I wasn't laughing because the idea of me dating you was so ridiculous. I was laughing because I gave you love advice urging you to ask people out and you followed it by immediately asking me out. It just seemed to me like you were making a joke. In retrospect, I was being stupid, but you should have said something, damn it. There was a long, uncomfortable silence as the two of them refused to look at each other and sat there in silence. We're going out on a date, Taven suddenly declared. Zorian gave her a weird look. But I'm over you, he pointed out. That's why I said I had a crush on you. It's all in the past for me. Yeah, I figured, she said. It doesn't matter. We're still having a date. Don't I get any say in this? Zorian asked, an amused smile on his face. What are you talking about? Taven sniffed disdainfully. You're the one who asked me to a date. I'm just accepting your invitation. With a bit of a delay. Zorian laughed at the uniquely Taven logic. A bit of a delay, she says. You really are something, he said, shaking his head. Fine. Have it your way. Good, she said simply, then looked away, as if too shy to meet his eyes. Zorian smiled. He had been telling the truth, and he really didn't have a crush for her any longer. Any romantic feeling he'd had for her had petered out during his long stay in the time loop. But he'd be lying if he said he wasn't kind of glad about this. Chapter 072 Crossroads. He never really realized how beautiful Sioria could be in the evening. That was Zorian's thought as he and Taven wandered around Sioria, checking up street stands and discussing casual topics. Most settlements grew dark and quiet as evening approached, giving off a dangerous and sinister atmosphere, but Sioria was a major metropolis and this was the week before the summer festival. The streets were lively and well illuminated, with lots of people wandering around and lots of street vendors setting up stands and trying to convince these people to part with their money for sweets, trinkets and so on. Zorian would never have guessed that he would enjoy this kind of atmosphere. In the past, he had found occasions like this to be rather aggravating and avoided them whenever possible. Of course, in the past, Zorian would get headaches just from being in a crowd and he didn't have a pretty girl to keep him company. He gave a sideways glance to Taven, who was walking beside him. Even though this was just a friendly date and not anything romantic, he couldn't help but treat it fairly seriously. He had chosen to wear a fairly formal outfit for the evening, took her to an expensive restaurant and even invited her for a round of dance. He was initially worried he was taking things too far, but considering Taven came to the date wearing a very expensive-looking dress and had kept her usual cheery disposition throughout the entire evening, he seemed to have made a good choice. "I've got to say, this went a lot better than I thought it would," Taven suddenly said. Zorian raised an eyebrow at her. "Wait, that came out kind of wrong. What I mean is, considering how bad both of us are at the social side of things." Zorian gave her a faint smile and decided to save her from further awkwardness. "It's fine," he said. "I get your point. I'm also pleasantly surprised at how well this turned out. I guess we're better at this than we thought." "Well, in my case it's mostly trial and error, so I can't feel too proud about myself," Taven laughed lightly. "I went to quite a few dates in the past. Plenty of guys get attracted to me for my looks and don't quite comprehend what they're getting into until they experience it firsthand. Trust me, my first date was a real disaster." "Oh, you'll have to tell me that story sometime," Zorian teased. "No way," she said, giving him a playful shove and causing him to stumble to the side a little. He nearly crashed into an elderly couple walking past them, but managed to correct himself in time. The less people know that story, the better. Hell, sometimes I wish I could forget that memory myself. But then I'd probably make the same mistakes all over again, so I guess it's a good thing I can't forget." She frowned suddenly, staring at the night sky for a moment before giving him a curious look. "What?" he prodded. "What about you? Do you do this often?" she asked him. "Do what often? Go on a date with you?" Zorian asked, amused. "Well, not with me," she said, rolling her eyes. "I mean in general. You've been in this time loop for years. Surely you've gone on a few dates in all that time." "A few," Zorian admitted. "Ha!" she said, pointing her finger at him triumphantly. "I knew it." Zorian opened his mouth to respond but Taven immediately stopped him. "Don't you try and bewitch me with your honeyed words," she said in mock outrage. "I bet you tell them to every girl you pursue." "But I haven't even said anything yet," Zorian pointed out. "Really, I have no intention of justifying myself to you. Based on what you just told me about your dating experiences, you went to a lot more dates than I have. You heartbreaker." They kept talking and meandering through the streets for a while longer, until eventually the conversation wound down and they both seemed to reach an unspoken agreement that it was getting late and that it was time for the day to end. Zorian couldn't help but get progressively quieter and more contemplative as the date grew to a close. They had been walking in silence for several minutes when Taven decided to speak up again. "What's wrong?" Taven asked. "Why did you get so depressed all of a sudden? Was it something I said?" Zorian said, broken out of his reverie. No, it's not you. I'm just thinking. Well, it's probably for the best if I don't tell you." "Zorian, don't make me hit you," she said warningly. "Fine, if you insist," Zorian said, giving her an awkward chuckle. "I was just thinking how utterly depressing it is that you will not remember anything that happened tonight in future restarts. We cleared the air between us, enjoyed a wonderful evening. And none of that will matter when the loop resets again. You will revert to the same suspicious, borderline hostile Tivan that I get at the start of every restart. It takes half of each restart just to convince you the time loop is real and that I haven't been lying to you since I met you or been replaced by an imposter, never mind anything else. Taven winced, looking away guiltily. No, don't feel guilty, Zorian told her, shaking his head. It's a perfectly reasonable reaction. It's one thing for old, experienced mages like Sveen, Alanik and Daemon to believe in the time loop. They've dealt with many complicated situations in their life and experienced plenty of strange magic. People like you and me? Well, did you know I spent the first 6 restarts going to classes like everything was just fine, hoping everything would return to normal if I just kept my head down and behaved like usual. Taven gave him a surprised look. Yes, I know, Zorian nodded. It's kind of stupid, but that's what I did. Your reaction is pretty good, all things considered. It's just that I really like how this turned out, and yet, I realize this will probably forever remain an empty memory in my head. I can't replicate the chain of events that led to this in the real world. I'm not even sure I can replicate it in future restarts. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out what I should do about this in the future. A short, awkward silence descended on the scene, causing Zorian to wince a little inside at his own poor timing. Why did he insist on telling her this now? He just couldn't let things end on a positive note, could he? Sorry, he said quietly. He suddenly felt like he could understand some of Zach's attitude towards people around them. Was this why Zach no longer bothered to actively befriend any of their classmates or friendly strangers, even though he clearly used to do so extensively in the past? The way Zorian was feeling this evening. Perhaps this was how Zach felt all the time during his earlier years. Making friends and experiencing life-changing moments with them over and over again, only for the other party to forget all about it in the next restart. Don't be sorry, Taven said. What are friends for if they can't even listen to you whine from time to time? Besides, it was a fun evening. One moment of depressing seriousness isn't going to ruin it. Eventually they reached a crossroads where their paths separated and stopped. Zorian racked his head for a moment, trying to figure out what was the appropriate way to end the day. They weren't actually romantically involved, after all. So, I guess this is it, he eventually said lamely. I guess it is, Taven agreed, equally lamely. After a second of hesitation, with neither of them making a move to leave, Taven spoke up again. Hey, she suddenly said. So, I know you said you were totally over me. And I totally respect that. But just in case you ever change your mind about that, you should really work on your body a little. What? Zorian asked, surprised. You know. Start running and exercising. Pick up some kind of physically intensive outdoor hobby. Put on some muscle, she said. I'm not saying you stand no chance otherwise, but... Zorian huffed at her, torn between amusement and exasperation. But it would do wonders to make you see me as relationship material, right? He surmised. Taven nodded. Fair enough. I'll keep that in mind. Well, Taven's preferences in men aside, he had been rather annoyed with his lack of endurance lately. It made things more difficult than they needed to be and forced him to constantly drink potions just to keep up with Zach and others. It wasn't a huge issue in the time loop, but such an extensive use of potions was inadvisable in the long term. Once he was out of the time loop, he'd probably end up working on his physique on his own initiative, just so he could maintain the sort of pace he was used to by now. In any case, this was the end of their evening together. After saying their goodbyes, both of them went their separate ways. Zorian deliberately took the scenic route back to Amaya's place, consumed in his own thoughts and in no hurry to get back to sleep. Break, Simulacrum number 2, stationed in Koth, was pretty pleased with how things were going. Being stationed in Koth was usually a rather boring task, since it meant being stranded in an alien land whose language and writing he did not understand. He couldn't read any of the local books, he couldn't engage in casual conversations with people, and he couldn't cast any spells without good reason. This time, however, he was living in the Tartamatula estate. The Tartamatula knew very well he was just a simulacrum, but this didn't seem to bother them much. They treated him just as well as they did the real Zorian. They gave him a room to sleep in, a teacher to help him master the local language, and access to things like paper and building materials for his research. Plus, there was Tarun and Karma, Damon's two teammates who were currently trapped in the Tartamatula estate. Perhaps because they currently had nothing better to do and were bored out of their minds, or maybe because the original really left an impression on them, but both of them proved very receptive to the simulacrum's offer of magic exchange. Karma was the more conventional of the two. Although Zorian had never seen divinations being used in such a way before he'd met her, she claimed she was using pretty standard magic that could be acquired from practically anywhere. Even her flower-shaped divination aid was simply something she had commissioned from a professional artificer, not something she had made herself. Thus, she didn't feel much need to keep her methods secret. In exchange for the many rare and exotic spells that Zorian had acquired in the time loop, she was entirely willing to show him some tricks of her trade and give him guidance on how best to develop his divination skills. In addition, she gave him a list of people to talk to in case he wanted to pursue a career in the field, completely unprompted by the simulacrum. He suspected she had some kind of deal with these people to send young talents their way, but he decided to give them a visit in one of the future restarts anyway. As for Tarun, he was pursuing a very rare and exotic field of magic that involved extracting and preserving organs of magical creatures and then using specialized control spells to turn them into something of an extension of the caster. It was not a popular field of study, both due to having been created relatively recently and because it existed in something of a legal limbo in most places, so Tarun was actually ecstatic when the simulacrum showed an interest in it. Most people considered his magic to be somewhat creepy and off-putting. The simulacrum very much doubted the original would dive particularly deeply into the field. It would take a lot of time to get anywhere with it and it didn't provide anything they desperately needed. However, some of the spells and techniques Tarun used to control and make use of his eyes could potentially be used to improve coordination between Zorian and his golems, or even Zorian and his simulacrums. Of course, such developments were too general to be the cause of the simulacrum's current happiness with his situation. The truth was, he had recently dodged a huge bullet. Mother and father were coming to Koth, and someone had to pick them up and smuggle them into the Tartamatula estate. That someone was, of course, Damon. But Damon also insisted that Zorian accompany him in this task. He wouldn't budge on this in the slightest, stubbornly insisting it was Zorian's family duty to accompany him to pick up their parents. Sometimes it was good to be just a simulacrum. While the original had to explain to mother and father what he was doing in Koth, he was told instead to stay hidden from them at all times in order to minimize the amount of necessary explanations. An order he was only too happy to obey. He was currently safely sequestered in the corner of the Tartamatula library. Of course the estate had its own library, humming a discordant tune to himself and reading a children's book in an attempt to hone his ability to read the local writing. Sadly, language skills were one of those things that were almost impossible for him to transfer to the original in any meaningful manner, so this was something done more for his own amusement than any long-term gain. At some point Arissa had also entered the room, but he paid little heed to that, giving her a short greeting and then getting back to his book. He had monopolized one of the 3 tables in the room, stacking it full of books that he judged to be relatively easy to understand, but that still left plenty of space for her to work with. He didn't react even when she looked over his shoulder to see what he was reading. He wasn't ashamed of his choice of reading in the slightest. Everybody had to start somewhere. Plus, the book had pretty pictures. However, Arissa didn't just pick up a book from the library and leave, like the simulacrum expected her to. Instead she fetched a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down next to him. "Yes?" he asked, curious. It was unusual for Arissa to deliberately seek him out like this, to say the least. Aside from that one time when she invited the original for a discussion via Damon, she had been quite reserved. "I'm worried," she said simply. "Damon and your other self should be back in a few hours." Ah, the simulacrum said, suddenly understanding what this was about. You're worried about mother and father coming here. Yes, she confirmed. I know I'm being rude here, but I was wondering if you could tell me a little about your parents. Me? The simulacrum asked incredulously. I was told simulacrums retained most of the memory of the original, Arissa said blandly. You know that wasn't my point, the simulacrum complained. Arissa smiled faintly at him. I mean, the original doesn't exactly have the best relationship with the rest of his family. What could I possibly tell you that Damon hadn't already? Damon got really evasive about his parents once it became obvious they don't approve of our marriage, Arissa said, shaking her head. He says I shouldn't worry, that he'll handle it, but how can I possibly not worry? He clearly thinks the world of them, and here they are, coming all the way to another continent to talk him out of marrying me. This will probably sound a little flippant, but there's probably no need for you to worry so much over this, the simulacrum told her. He's their darling genius son. Whatever he wants, he's going to get it. It's been that way since forever. It would still mean a lot to me if you could tell me a little about them before they arrive, Arissa insisted. Simulacrum number 2 gave her a contemplative look. Truthfully, he wasn't sure if telling her about mother and father would be a good idea. His depiction of them would no doubt be really negative, and might end up worsening tensions between his parents and Arissa as a result. That probably wasn't in anyone's interest, least of all Arissa's. You're basically asking me to stick my hand into the fire, here, the simulacrum said. I guess I am, she admitted. Then let me ask you something first, the simulacrum said. Are you interested in Damon only because of his mind magic bloodline thingy? He expected Arissa to be either shocked at the question or explode with outrage. He did not expect her to laugh at him. What, are you worried I'm taking advantage of your big brother? She asked with a grin. Just a little, the simulacrum admitted. He's an empath, so he should be hard to fool. But you're a talented mind mage from a family specializing in mind magic. Anything is possible. And here Damon thinks you hate him, Arissa said with a sigh. To answer your question, it's definitely not irrelevant. I love him, but if he didn't have this innate mind magic affinity of his, I probably would not choose to marry him. I love my family too, and I need to keep their interests in mind. However, do you honestly think your brother is marrying me purely for love? The simulacrum gave her a surprised look. By marrying me, he is marrying into nobility and wealth. It's not his only concern, but it's hardly irrelevant. If I was a poor orphan, or even just a well-to-do middle-class girl, he would have never agreed to marry me. So no, I don't think I'm taking advantage of him. We both have our ambitions. It's just fortunate that we can fulfill them with someone we actually like. Huh? The simulacrum said thoughtfully. After a few seconds of silence, Arissa spoke up again. So can I get an answer to my question, then? She asked. Sure, the simulacrum shrugged. So, the first thing you should know about our parents is that they are very driven and ambitious people. Our father, Andrew Kaczynski, was the fourth son of a wealthy farmer. Our mother, Sikan Kaczynski, was the only daughter of one of the few remaining witches, who raised her alone after her husband left her. Father knew that as a fourth son, he would never inherit anything. Thus, when he was 15 years old, he managed to procure a small loan from his father and left home to open his own business. He married our mother less than a year later. Over the years, they had turned that small initial business into a local power that has made them quite wealthy and respected. Well, not by your standards, but... It's impressive, Arissa nodded. They reached surprising heights from such humble roots. That must have taken a lot of work. They did work very hard to get where they are, the simulacrum agreed. He had his disagreements with mother and father, but they had very much earned their wealth and status. Of course, their success involved just as much scheming as it did hard work, but he was pretty sure Arissa understood that part without him having to spell it out. But while such attitude brought them success, it does have some consequences. Bluntly put, they view almost everything through the prism of how it will reflect on the family reputation and finances. This marriage between you and Damon. Even if mother and father thought this was a good thing for Damon, that's it. That's what I've been missing all this time. They don't see the benefit for their family as a whole. Arissa exclaimed suddenly. Of course. After putting so much money and effort into Damon, they naturally expect to see some kind of return for their trouble. Ah. We'll continue this later, okay? I need to make some arrangements. The simulacrum watched, surprised and amused, as Arissa hurriedly left the library. He wasn't entirely sure what happened there, but it would seem that Arissa didn't actually perceive his parents' attitude as wrong. Considering the sort of background she comes from and her explanation about how her marriage with Damon came to be, he probably shouldn't be surprised. Well, at least now I know why Damon likes her so much, Simulacrum mused quietly to himself. She's like a younger version of Mother. Sometimes life really is a comedy. Break. In normal circumstances, picking up Mother and Father from Jajuka Harbor and bringing them to the Tarhamatula estate would have been a simple matter. Now that Damon was under such intense scrutiny, however, this became a huge, complicated endeavor. The Tarhamatula mobilized a large portion of their manpower to disrupt and distract surveillance operations that kept an eye on Damon's movements. When Damon and Zorian finally left the estate, 5 other decoy teams, shape-shifted in their likeness, also left at the same time to muddy the water further. Then, all 6 teams started teleporting around randomly for a while, before each of them made their way to a completely different city. Despite all these preparations, the whole plan would have surely failed if Damon had really gone to pick up Mother and Father during this trip. In reality, the whole operation was simply a giant distraction. Its main purpose was to mask the fact that Zorian had created a third simulacrum while they were teleporting around randomly through Koth and then sent it away to hide while they drew everyone's attention. When Damon and Zorian returned to the Tarhamatula estate, Zorian's brand new simulacrum slowly made his way to Jajuka and then opened a hidden gate between the city and the estate, allowing Damon to enter and leave the city too quickly for anyone to really intercept him. Naturally, this meant that Zorian's involvement was absolutely crucial for the operation's success. If it weren't for that, Zorian would have never agreed to take part in it, no matter how much Damon begged and threatened. How the hell was he supposed to explain his presence in Koth to Mother and Father? No matter how poor their knowledge of magic was, they would surely recognize dimensional gates and simulacrums as high-level magic that should be way beyond him. Even if you hadn't come with me, they would have still realized you were in Koth, Damon told him. You were too well known among the Tarhamatula by now. Someone would have surely let them know about you, whether intentionally or accidentally. Maybe, but that wouldn't have been my problem, Zorian countered. I'd be back in Seoria, and it would be your job to figure out an explanation that made sense and deal with their attitude. Damon scowled at him, saying nothing. In any case, the initial meeting was much calmer and more subdued than Zorian expected. The steamship that carried their parents languidly entered Jajuka Harbor and then disgorged an endless stream of passengers and cargo, temporarily creating a miniature pandemonium as the throng of disembarking people and dockworkers shouted and pushed at one another. By the time Damon and Zorian had found Mother and Father, they already looked absolutely exhausted and were in no mood to start a fight. They were surprised to see Zorian in Koth, of course, but mostly they were glad to have an extra person help out with the luggage and whatnot. Aren't you supposed to watch Kirill? Mother asked him, frowning. I am, Zorian said. I'm just here to pick you up. I'll be back in Seoria before nightfall. How? Father asked. I thought no one could teleport over such distances. And teleportation is supposed to be advanced magic, anyway. It's a secret, Zorian simply said. Father made an indecipherable hum and said nothing further. Whatever it is, I hope you can use the same method to send us home when the time comes, Mother said, sounding worn and tired. Ship travel doesn't agree with me. I think I lost a whole year of my life getting here. It would be great if we could avoid boarding a ship for the return trip. And that was it. Nothing more was spoken about Zorian's presence. Especially since, when the group had finally stepped through the dimensional gate and entered the Tarhamatula estate, They were greeted by Rissa and the rest of the Tarantula delegation. At that point, the mystery of Zorian's presence on another continent was the furthest thing from their minds. Naturally, Mother and Father were full of smiles and compliments. The tiredness they displayed before Damon and Zorian seemed to instantly disappear, and they busied themselves with handing out very expensive gifts and endlessly praising the thoughtfulness and generosity of their hosts. If Zorian hadn't known in advance what their purpose for coming here was, he would have never guessed they disapproved of the marriage. 2 days passed. Mother and Father slowly settled into the Tarantula estate. Zorian tried to stay away from the place as much as possible, not wanting to get tangled into Damon's mess too much, and the simulacrum he had left in the estate did the same. As such, he didn't really know how their attempts to talk Damon out of the marriage were progressing. He had his own things to worry about. Now that he had a simulacrum outside the Tarantula estate, he hurriedly arranged for a group of silent doorway adepts to be transported to Koth, next to one of the local Bakura gates. Happily, the operation to acquire the gate key was a full success. Both Zorian and the silent doorway adepts were ecstatic about this. For the Aranya, this gate key represented access to a virgin territory awash with opportunities. For Zorian, it was a way to ensuring easy access to Koth without having to rely on Damon. Plus, he suspected that having this key would make it much easier to convince the silent doorway adepts to cooperate with him in future restarts. Now, however, Zorian was back in the Tarantula estate. His parents had specifically called for him to come see them. In all honesty, Zorian had totally expected this to happen. They had taken his presence in Koth in stride when they had first come, but now that they had time to rest, talk with people and think about things, they no doubt realized there was something very much off about him. The only thing he hadn't been certain of was whether the restart would have come to an end before this happened. He was currently standing in one of Tarantula meeting rooms, Father and Mother standing in front of him. Originally, Damon had wanted to be present for the talk as well, but they had shooed him away, insisting this was a private talk. That had been kind of amusing. It was not often that they treated their favorite son in such fashion. Apparently, whatever arrangements Arissa did were insufficient, and they still opposed the marriage. And since Damon stubbornly refused to give up on the idea, they were currently not terribly fond of him. "We spoke with Damon about you," Mother said suddenly. She had a complex, worried look on her face, as if she was having trouble deciding how to handle this. Father, on the other hand, stayed silent and stony-faced, his emotions indecipherable. "Yes?" Zorian responded blandly. "He tells us you're incredibly powerful and competent. Far more than you let on," she said. "True," Zorian admitted. He didn't see the point of hiding it. They already knew he could move across continents in a quick, reliable manner. "But why would you keep something like that hidden from us?" Mother asked imploringly. "Having another genius in the family is a joyous thing. Surely you don't think we would have stood in your way?" "Ah, you mean, like you're not standing in the way of Damon's marriage?" Zorian asked innocently. "That's something completely different," Mother said, scowling at him. She quickly reined herself in, however. "And besides, we're not standing in Damon's way. We're simply trying to pull him back for taking a wrong turn. If he stubbornly refuses to heed our advice, we will reluctantly accept it, not sabotage his life in revenge." "What she's saying," Father suddenly spoke up, "is that we already disagree with what you're doing with your life, so what's one disagreement more? You can just throw one of your juvenile hissy fits, just like you always do, and we'll grit our teeth and bear it because at the end of the day you're still our son. Just like we always do." Zorian stretched his mouth into a thin line and gave Father a narrowed stare, but said nothing. Father simply stared back at him, as if daring him to say anything. Honey, I thought we agreed I would be the one to talk," Mother sighed. Father raised both of his hands in a gesture of surrender. He also gave her an exasperated look, but she had already turned back towards Zorian, ignoring him. "What are you planning, Zorian?" Mother asked him bluntly. "Nothing much," Zorian said. "I'm going to move out of the house immediately after I graduate." Maybe sooner. Open my own business, buy myself a house, things like that. You think running a business is easy? Father challenged. Well, that didn't take long. I'm an amazing midge, Zorian said immodestly. Even if I had the worst business sense in the world, I'd still be able to make enough for a living. But the family business, Mother began. Not for all the money in the world, Zorian said, cutting her off. A brief silence descended upon the scene as Mother and Father shared a long look between them. Oh, Zorian said, suddenly remembering something. I'll also take care of Kirill. This statement naturally caused both of them to give Zorian a look of surprise. What do you mean you'll take care of Kirill? Mother asked slowly. Why would she need someone to take care of her? Well, someone needs to teach her magic and nullify that stupid arranged marriage you prepared for her, Zorian said casually. A look of intense, shocked outrage appeared on Mother's face. For a moment she seemed unable to process what she just heard, but then she outright exploded at him. You little brat. She snapped at him agitatedly. You have no idea what you're talking about. Weirdly, Father just laughed at the scene, shaking his head at nobody in particular. Zorian was mystified by this reaction, but decided to ignore it for now. The situation seems simple enough to my eyes, Zorian countered, unperturbed by her outrage. In regards to living your life, we can humor you, but you have no right at all to tell me how to raise my daughter. Mother shouted angrily at him, stomping threateningly straight into his personal space. You are way out of line. Ander, you tell him. What, me? Father said with a look of exaggerated surprise. I thought we agreed you would be the one to talk to him? Mother gave him an angry, venomous look that promised later retribution, but didn't press him further. You have no idea what's in Kirill's best interest, Zorian, Mother told him warningly. Don't stick your nose where it does not belong. I'm afraid that, if I don't get an actual explanation, I'm still going to go through with my idea, Zorian told her. You can't take a child from her parents, even if you're her brother, Mother told him angrily. We can call the police. But would you actually do so? Zorian challenged. She shrank back a little. They both knew she wouldn't. Besides, I bet that marriage is of questionable legality to begin with. The marriage is negotiable, Mother said, pacing around the room in agitation. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just an informal agreement, not a legally binding document. It's not like we'd force Kirill to go through it at all costs. But magic is absolutely off the table. She can never, under any circumstances, be taught magic. Why? Zorian frowned. I'm trying to do her a favor. Mother shouted, turning to faces again. Don't you know what her roots are? What my mother was? Zorian gave her an uncomprehending look. Her mother? What did her mother have to do with anything? He knew they didn't get along well, but he never really heard anything too shocking about her. Besides, she had been dead for a while now. Wait, he said. Are you talking about, she was a witch? Mother said, preempting his conclusion. She was a witch and she was so damn proud of that fact. She never let anyone forget it. Once, she even threatened she was going to poison the town well when a bunch of customers tried to get out of paying her for the potions she made them. You know, just like the witches of old were said to do when someone wronged them. Zorian winced. You have no idea what it's like to be the daughter of a witch, Mother continued. A son is fine. Witches didn't care about male children. Everyone knows this. They firmly believed that magic was transferred to the child through the womb, so only a daughter can continue the lineage. Zorian raised an eyebrow at her. Why would they? I don't know why they believed what they did, Mother said, as if reading his mind. I never cared to know. I just wished she would shut up about witches and let me live some semblance of a normal life. But she never did, so everyone around me saw me as a soul-stealing, mind-ensnaring, poison-wielding witch-in-waiting. And if Kirill learns magic, she'll suffer the same fate. Mother. Zorian sighed. I was really lucky to marry your father, Mother said. Well, you were a pretty fine catch yourself, Father said, grinning. He had been silent while Mother ranted about her childhood frustrations, but apparently he now felt it was safe to throw in a comment or two. Mother ignored him, though. She was probably still angry about his earlier quip about her being the designated speaker. My daughter won't have to fear for her future and rely on luck to find a good husband. She won't have people cross to the other side of the road when they see her or spreading vile slander about her completely unprovoked, Mother continued. Unlike my mother, I've done everything I can to distance myself from our family legacy. So long as she takes my example and stays well away from anything magic-related, anyone that tries to start something will end up looking petty and paranoid. But if she starts learning magic, then everything will be ruined. You don't know that, Zorian pointed out. Why take the risk? Mother challenged. Maybe if she married early, to a wealthy and respected husband. But you already said you were opposed to that, didn't you? So where does that leave us? Zorian stared at her. This was the side of Mother that he had never really known before. Was this why she was so obsessed with family reputation and social position? He looked at Father, but the man was uncharacteristically skittish. He just looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. Though he didn't actually say anything, Zorian understood the message. He was on his own here. Kirill was Mother's project, and he wasn't going to stick his nose in it unless he had to. What if Kirill doesn't want to go along with your plan? Zorian asked slowly. She's 9, Mother said. She doesn't know what she wants. She's not always going to be 9, though, Zorian pointed out. Yes, well, we can continue this conversation when she gets older, she told him firmly. You didn't start learning magic when you were 9, either. She had a point there. In all honesty, he wasn't willing to push this matter further than this. He mostly just raised the issue to gauge her reaction to it. He hadn't expected this sort of response. On top of that, while Kirill said she wanted to learn magic, she was also rather impatient and flighty. Who knew whether she was even capable of the discipline required to become a mage? Besides, the most important thing was that the arranged marriage was apparently just an informal thing and not something his parents would push for at all costs. He couldn't claim with certainty that it would be a good idea to teach Kirill magic, but he knew for a fact that she hated the arranged marriage thing. Right, Zorian said finally. I'm not informed enough to make a decision here, so I'll withdraw for now. You're damn right you're going to withdraw, she told him. She still sounded outraged, but the anger was visibly draining out of her now that he was no longer challenging her. What the hell made you think you have the right to give me parenting advice? Not even your father dares to tell me how to raise my daughter, and you, an immature brat that has never even been with a woman, think you can tell me what to do. Why don't you make a daughter of your own if you think this was going to take quite a while, wasn't it? Out of the corner of his eye he saw Father staring at the scene and smiling faintly in schadenfreude. Zorian sighed. Yes, this would definitely take a while. Break. So, I discovered a new function of the orb, Zack said. Zorian stopped working on the metal, flower-shaped construct on his bench and gave Zack a curious look. What do you mean you found a new function? Zorian asked. I mean, one completely unrelated to its role as a mobile palace, Zack said, waving the orb in front of him. Look. Take the orb and try this. It took a while for Zack to convey to Zorian what he had to do to activate this new function he discovered. After all, the way Zorian interacted with the orb was completely different from the way Zack did. Zack's way was more instinctive, almost automatic, whereas Zorian had to take the initiative and actively grope around for a way to interface with it. Eventually, though, he succeeded. He connected with the orb in the new manner that Zack found and immediately found himself connected to something. Some kind of empty space, maybe. Weird, Zorian eventually said. Yeah, Zack said. I have no idea what this does, though. Neither do I, said Zorian after some tinkering. He handed the orb back to Zack. Keep tinkering with it. You'll probably have more luck with it than I would. Besides, Zack had far more free time to tinker with the orb than Zorian did. The restart was nearing its end and there were so many things that needed to be done. Break. The restart was almost over. Overall, Zorian would have described it as a highly productive one. The study of the gate stabilization frame they had stolen from the Ebeson base yielded a lot more results than Zorian expected. He now knew that some very unconventional methods had been used while making the gate. Instead of carving the spell formula necessary for the operation of the frame, the Ebesons had embedded them directly into the frame in the form of numerous magic threads. The frame literally had to be peeled away, layer by layer, in order for researchers to record the layout of the threads and attempt to decipher it. Sadly, though they had invited many capable researchers on the project, they had failed to make sense of how the frame worked. Perhaps if the gate frame was still actively maintaining a dimensional passage, but as it was, not a chance. Still, it was a start. A lot of important groundwork had been done, and future analysis of the gate should go much faster. It was probably good that they didn't manage to take an active gate in this restart. If they did, they would no doubt shy away from simply taking it apart like they ended up doing here, and several crucial insights would never have been made. The interrogation of Sadamir was also a success. Granted, the man knew so many important things that he and Ilanik had already agreed to keep kidnapping him in future restarts as well, but even his current gains were considerable. For instance, Zorian had finally found out what the deal was behind his strange transformations. While Sadamir was an extremely talented warder and soul mage, and dabbled in lots of other magics as well, he was not terribly impressive as a fighter. Sadamir was well aware of this, and thus decided to close that vulnerability by becoming a shifter. But he was overconfident and reached far beyond his grasp. Rather than picking one specific magical creature to fuse his soul with, he decided to splice up several magical creatures into some kind of unholy abomination that theoretically combined the best features of all of them, and then fused with that. According to Ilanik, it was incredible that the ritual didn't end up turning him utterly insane or a quivering mass of unstable flesh right from the get-go. As it was, the shifter ritual he designed was only a partial failure. The transformation was almost uncontrollable, forcing him to keep it suppressed at all times. But whenever he was under a lot of stress or in emotionally charged situations, his control inevitably started to slip, warping his mind. Still, while the shifter ritual was a failure in many ways, it did give him his signature resilience. One of the creatures he used in crafting his initial abomination was a troll, and the other a dragon. The other three were similarly hard to kill. Zorian shuddered to think what would happen if he were allowed to completely transform into his composite form. Another thing they found out from Sadamir was that there were some people related to the cult of the World Dragon that they had missed thus far when investigating the invaders. This was because they technically weren't cultists. In fact, they were purposely kept separated from known cultists as much as possible, so they would look as clean as possible in case somebody investigated them. This included a fair number of lawyers, low-level politicians, and even a respected judge. There was no time left to really check these people out, and Zorian suspected they weren't too important for understanding the invasion, but he made a mental note to investigate them anyway, just for the sake of being thorough. Eventually the day of the summer festival came, and no attack occurred. The Ebesons continued evacuating, the cult of the World Dragon never made a move, and the primordial trapped in the hole was never released. But the restart ended right on schedule anyway, and Zorian woke up in Surin, with Kirill wishing him a good morning.